I've been saved. Well, at least my reading life has been. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. So today I have a wrap up of what I've been doing in April, what I've been up to the last 2 weeks, what I'm reading right now, and what I am looking forward to for the rest of the month. And I started out with a little bit of a joke, but my reading life really has been saved, and that's by audiobooks. About a month ago is when I read my first audiobook. I haven't really read audiobooks in decades. And my friend Alex from Alex and Abridged, who actually just did a great video very recently about his favorite audiobook narrators. He has been a proselytizer for audiobooks for quite a long time, and I've been thinking about delving in, but I never took the plunge. And then last month, another friend, Carl, did a review of a book by James Baldwin, a collection of short stories, and I wanted to read it, but my library's ebook version was on hold. I'd have to wait a couple weeks. The audiobook version was available right away. So I jumped in, I read it, and I had a really good time. And since then, I've read about a dozen audiobooks. And it really has been a lifesaver because, my activities here at the monastery have started back up again. And it's just been really, really busy. And it's been hard to find time to read print books. It's been hard to find time to sit down and really focus, because when I do have some free time, I'm just tired, and the effort it takes to even read a book has been exhausting a little bit. And so because of that, I've read more audiobooks in the first half of this month than I have other books, and so it's been a real joy. Now I have cut down on a lot of my podcast listening, so I've kind of shifted where my free time attention is going. And I will say, of all the books I read, one book that I read not in the last 2 weeks, but actually I already talked about it last month, The Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. The language in that book was so lush and so beautiful that I would have liked to be able to linger on it a little more, to reread passages, to just spend time in the language. And that's not impossible with audiobooks, but it's a little harder. So that is one book that I think I would have gotten more out of if I had read the print book instead of the audiobook. Even though the audiobook was really good, and it had two different narrators for the 2 points of view, and I thought it was really well done and performed, but I would have liked to linger on it a little more. But other than that, every book I have read so far via audiobook, I have enjoyed a lot, and it's been really, like I said, a lifesaver for my reading. So with that, what have I been up to the last 2 weeks? Well, first I'll say I had a great conversation with Joanna and with Philip Chase over on Joanna's channel about Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. I talked about that book recently. I read it last month as part of the buddy read getting ready for this conversation. I really enjoyed the book, and the conversation was great. So I will link to that down below in the description box. I highly recommend you go check it out. It was a really, really wonderful conversation. Now, aside from that, what have I been reading? At the beginning of the year, I mentioned there are a number of series that I was hoping to read, and I've been trying to check off those series, and I managed to knock out a whole series in the last 2 weeks, and that is the Clown and Cornfield trilogy by Adam Caesar. This was great. The reason I picked it up now is because the film of the first movie is coming out, and I don't anticipate that I'm going to see the film anytime soon, but I wanted to have the books under my belt before the film came out, in case there are any spoilers that I see online or anything like that. And people have already seen the film. I've already heard some mini reviews of it. It hasn't been mass released yet, but some critics have already seen it, and it was already at some festivals. And so I jumped at the chance to pick up this audiobook as well, and I loved it. I'm probably going to do a review of the whole trilogy, so I won't talk too much about them now, except to say that first off, this is considered YA, but it's YA in the same way that Scream, for instance, is YA. That it is a very adult feeling thriller slash slasher. It is bloody, it is gory. I don't think there's any on-page sexual activity, but there isn't the normal kind of YA tropes of finding yourself. It just happens to be that the first book, the main characters are all teenagers. They're all high school seniors. But other than that, it isn't really a YA story. It is a slasher story. But what Caesar does is he really plays with the idea of a slasher in a fun way. I really enjoyed all three novels. The third novel especially turns things on its head in a way I didn't expect. And, even in the first novel, who the killer is, who the bad guy is, I had some ideas, but he took it farther than I had thought he was going to take it, and I really appreciated that. I read an interview with him recently talking about the film, and he does mention how the cover does look like a combination of maybe It and Children of the Corn or something like this. And you get that feeling going in, but you realize this isn't a supernatural creature. This is a slasher in the vein of Scream, or in the vein of the other slashers which come from the old genres, where there is a masked killer who part of the fun of the story is finding out who this killer is and why they are targeting who they're targeting. So it isn't some supernatural force. There is no Freddy or Jason or anything like this. It follows in that vein of a slasher / thriller with a masked killer. You have to find out who it is. And he plays with the tropes of the genre, I think, in a really smart way. He leans into some of the tropes, and others he leans in only to reverse them. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, it is a slasher. It is a bloody slasher that stars, teenage kids who eventually are in college, the ones that survive in the sequel. And then the third one, like I said, is more of a road trip. Things get turned on their head. They are not what you expect. So the first one is pretty conventional. Our final girl, Quinn, moves to a new town, and as soon as she moves in, she's there less than a week when the bodies start piling up, and so she's at the center of the story. And the only spoiler I'll say is that she's our final girl. She makes it through all 3 books. I won't say who else makes it through all 3 books because not everyone does. But so then in the next book, she started at college. You get these, in the beginning, you get these Scream 2 vibes, right? This idea that, oh no, now we're going to be at the college as a new setting. But that only lasts for a few chapters. And then events bring her back to the hometown and things start happening again. And then the third story, like I said, is a road trip story, essentially. And so all 3 of them have these different tones, and yet they have the same heart. And it was just a lot of fun. So if you like slashers, you want a bloody good time, Adam Caesar's Clown in a Cornfield 1, Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives, and Clown in a Cornfield 3, The Church of Friendo. All 3 of them are a lot of fun, and I had a great time reading them. Next, I read The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Christie. And this is a haunted house book, except instead of a haunted house, it is a haunted street, a haunted development. Our main character is a woman named Talitha, and her 2 best friends, when they were away at college their first year, something happened that caused their whole street to become haunted, to disappear. So no one can go in and no one can go out. It's like there's a bubble around it, and they're the only ones that can go in. And the story takes place 20 years later, and there is a group who is paying her to go back in because they want to investigate the paranormal activity of this whole street that basically has become a ghost street, that there's an invisible border, no one can go in or out. And so what happens when you go home again to your haunted house? So it asks these questions about trauma, about your past, about family, about what it means when something disappears and you're trying to grab onto it, but it slips through your hands. What is it when something disappears that you want to let go? And the only way to get back the things you want is to face the things you don't want. So what does it mean to be haunted? Right? I think that's part of the question. And you see this with a lot of haunted house stories, but this takes a different approach because it isn't just a haunted house. Like I said, it's a whole haunted street. It's a haunted neighborhood. And to return to it is to be transformed by it. And that is a really interesting story and a really heartfelt story. So I thought this was really good. I do definitely recommend it. It was like an ethereal ghost story. It was very emotional in that way because our main character, when her street disappeared, her mother and her sister and all their families disappeared with it. It isn't that everyone there died. They just disappeared. They ceased to exist in any meaningful way. And so she wants to go back. She wants to try to rescue her sister if that's possible. And you don't really know if it's possible. It's been 20 years, And so what did you leave behind and what are you searching for? And how did what you left behind follow you wherever you go? Like, how are you haunted by your past? So I thought it was really well written, really well conceived. If you're looking for an interesting twist on a ghost story or on a haunted house story, The Haunting of Velkwood is a great option. Next, I read an ARC. This is a book that I got from NetGalley. This is Polybius by Colin Armstrong, and I don't think I'm going to do a dedicated review to this. This was fun, but it wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be. I don't know if you know the urban legend of Polybius, but if you know that going in, which it kind of assumes that then there isn't a whole lot of reveal in this story. And you can see from the cover, Arcade Cabinet, the urban legend of Polybius is that there is this arcade game called Polybius that has some sort of mind control capacity over anyone that plays it. And whether it was a game that was created by the US government, or whether it was created by a foreign government and used to infiltrate American citizens, or whether it was some lab somewhere that was testing some sort of mind control, that's the urban legend about it. And there's no record of this game, but there are people that insist that they've seen this game. They played this game in the early 80s. And so that is the urban legend, and that is what it's playing with. It takes place in the early 80s, and it's centered around this game. This arcade cabinet comes to this town. Our main character is a young woman named Andy, again, a senior in high school, I think. And she's new to this town, a town that is kind of being gentrified very quickly, and the locals are kind of being pushed out. And She is coded as autistic. That's never mentioned, but she's coded that way, the way she behaves, the way she appreciates her interiority and doesn't like others. And her mother and her father have split up. Her father is bipolar, and because of that, the mother and father aren't able to stay together, but she would rather be with her father, who is a coder who works for Silicon Valley, which is just kind of growing and emerging right now at this time period in the story. And so she is resentful and angry and doesn't want to be here. And she works at the arcade, fixing games, programming games, doing all of the electrical engineering work. And the other kind of main character you see is a boy named Roe, who's somewhat interested in her. And his father is the sheriff of this small town, who he himself is being pushed out because these new developers are coming in and they are buying up all the land, and he has gotten on the wrong side of some of these developers. So he's an elected position, so he is probably on his way out. So these are our main characters. We have Andy and we have Roe, and then we have their parents, the sheriff, and Andy's mom is the local doctor, their local physician. And this cabinet shows up in this arcade game, and people become obsessed by it. People start building big crowds around it all the time, and anyone that watches this, they all of a sudden have these incredible bursts of rage and anger and violence, and they go into these fugue states where they don't remember. If you watch them from the outside, you see them go into a fugue state and then just commit horrendous acts of violence. So the whole town is overcome by these acts of violence. And Andy pretty quickly figures out that it is the cabinet, this arcade game, that's doing it, but they don't know why. And so she and Roe are going on a hunt to figure out why this is happening. And so they're trying to solve the mystery of this arcade game. I think the two characters are done well enough. They're interesting. You like to spend time with them. It takes place in 1981 or 1982, and sometimes that is important, but sometimes the setting is easy to forget. It's useful insofar as their access to the technology doesn't exist. So there is Usenet instead of the internet. And of course, she's a nerd, so she does use Usenet, but they can't look up things easily. They get lost easily. They need an atlas when they're trying to find something, so those kind of things play on the side of it, but there isn't too big of a nostalgia factor the way you have with like Stranger Things or with other TV shows that play in the 80s. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it wants to have that nostalgia factor, at least the marketing suggests that it does, but it didn't really come through for me, which was fine for me. I don't always relate well to that. It doesn't always draw me into a story. It feels like a gimmick. So I thought it was a decent balance of letting you know the setting and the environment and how that plays a role in our character's ability to solve the mystery, but it doesn't overwhelm the story. The story isn't about the 80s. It is about, this character trying to investigate this mystery. I think the problem for me, the character, like I said, the characters are fine. I enjoy them. The idea of the story, I think, is the problem, which is that you already know going into it that this cabinet is the problem. And you don't know why, you don't know who's behind it, but we all know it. So it takes them almost a third of the book to really decide that this cabinet is the problem. And then another third of the book to decide what they're going to do about it. And then they try to do something about it, or to, investigate who it was that created the cabinet and so forth. And so the journey is just not very interesting because you already know so much of it going in. And even if you don't know the urban legend of the Polybius arcade, like the arcade game is the cover of the book, and the prologue to the book also is centered around the arcade in a different environment. So you clearly know that it's the arcade game that is causing the problems. And Andy herself is somewhat not affected by the game, and the reason for that is very clear. Like, I don't know if it's supposed to be a reveal. They reveal it later on, but it's very, very clear. Like, he telegraphs it very, very heavy-handedly more than once. And so it just didn't draw me in. The mystery was fine. The results went somewhere I didn't expect them, actually. I will say that the ending went farther than I had anticipated it going. So I'll give it a lot of props for that. I had fun with the ending. I had fun with the story. It just wasn't as much as I wanted it to be. So if it sounds like something up your alley, I think you'll have fun with it. The writing is decent. The character work is good. The world building is not great, but not bad. It's just that the story didn't have as much oomph gripping me as I had hoped it would, but it also was a fun thing to read. So you have to have that balance. Take that for what you will. Next thing I read was a nonfiction book. This is Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green, and I love this. I have been looking forward to this for a while. I've been hearing John Green talk about it on his YouTube channel for a while. If you don't know, John Green is an author who has written things like The Fault in Your Stars and other kind of YA stories, and he's recently getting into writing more nonfiction. And so this is a popular history of tuberculosis. And tuberculosis is the world's deadliest disease, and it is also an eminently curable disease. And the only reason it isn't cured is due to human greed, essentially, and a lack of human empathy. And so he goes into what a critical role tuberculosis has played in so many aspects of our life that we don't know. For instance, we wouldn't have the modern day cowboy hat if it wasn't for tuberculosis, and other weird little things like that. Tuberculosis really has an interesting history. If you look back before it got the name tuberculosis, when it was consumption and it was looked upon as an artist's disease and a disease that left its victims beautiful in some way. But then once germ theory came along and they were able to identify what was the cause of this disease, all of a sudden it became a poor person's disease. And the treatment for it and the alienation that victims felt is much different, right? Due to not the disease itself, but to how society labels and apprehends and understands and engages with the disease. This book I thought was really effective. It was emotional. He put a lot of himself in this nonfiction story, and he reads the audiobook, he performs it himself, and I think that was really effective. Like I said, it's an emotional story. He talks about his own battle with disease, with anxiety disorder. He talks about his family. He talks about his brother who recently had cancer and his own son, Henry, and a young man he met in Sierra Leone named Henry, who reminded him of his son. He met him at a tuberculosis sanatorium, and that young man, Henry, is like the heart of this book. And so it's a really emotional book, but it's also just a really fun, easy pop science book that isn't really just about this disease. It's about the society and the human decisions made around that disease, or decisions not made around that disease. And he tries to infuse the book with optimism, because this is something we can change. Now, this book was written before certain people were elected into office in the US, and the likelihood of there being critical funding to help eliminate tuberculosis now is even slimmer than it was before, but there are still optimistic ways to look at this. And that is the message he takes away, is that we have the capacity to do something as individuals. We have done things in the past. And so this book, even though it is very sobering, it is also filled with hope. And so I really appreciate it. I definitely recommend it. Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. And then I reread a book. This is a book I read a while ago, Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. It is his first novel that he released. Again, it's a YA horror, body horror, religious horror novel. And I loved it when it came out. I read the arc of it, actually, and then I bought a copy right away. And now I had a chance to listen to the audiobook version because I noticed it was available. And I had a great time with it. It was like almost a comfort read because, like I said, I've already read it a couple years ago, and so it was a very quick reread. But reading it in a different format this time was a really enjoyable experience, and so I do recommend it. Another reason I wanted to read this again is because they are making a filmed version of it. I think it's actually an animated miniseries, but I'm not quite sure about that. But I know it has been optioned, and they're in the process of making a film version of it. So I wanted to refresh myself on the story, beats, and the characters before that is released. And I'm really glad that I chose to do the audiobook version because that added a new dimension to it for me that I didn't have previously. And then the last book that I finished this month is The Staircase in the Woods by Chuck Wendig. This is another arc that I read, and I really enjoyed this. I'm going to have a full review coming up for this later. But the basic premise is 5 teenagers who are like your losers club. Like, there's a lot of homages to Stephen King. So these are 5 teenagers who all come from their own troubled homes, but they have found their own family within, their small group. They go into the woods and they find this random staircase in the middle of the woods, and only 4 of them leave the woods because one of them disappears up this staircase. And then you cut to 20 years later, and that's when the story takes place, is in the present, 20 years later, and they go back into the woods and they find another staircase, and they decide it's time to try to find their missing friend. This is actually, again, a haunted house story, and it asks the question, what's the difference between a haunted house and a haunted home? And I thought it was really effective. I thought it was really a really interesting character study, and it used the supernatural device of this mysterious staircase in the woods and so forth, and then what they find at the top of the staircase. It used that supernatural device as an opportunity to do a character study about these 4/5 really complicated, interesting, intriguing characters that you felt for. Like, you had strong emotions for all of them, and they all felt really well realized. So I had a good time with this book. I am going to do a full review of it coming up, so I won't say anything else about it here. And those are all the books that I finished this month. And of those, only the 2 arcs, so Polybius and The Staircase in the Woods, were the ones that I read ebook versions of, print versions of, and the rest of them were all audiobooks. So like I said, if it wasn't for audiobooks, I would have done very little reading this month. Now, I have been reading a few other things. I'm currently reading The Children of Time with Pat from Book Chat with Pat, and the 2 of us are going through this quite slowly because there are other obligations. So I think we're only doing 150 pages a week. So we're halfway through as I record this, and I am loving this, which I'm not surprised. Everything I've read by Adrian Tchaikovsky I've really enjoyed, but this is a lot of fun. So we are joining the bandwagon of people that are fans of Children of Time series, and I look forward to continuing on with the series once I finish that. Another book that I am about 2/3 of the way done is Imago by Octavia Butler. This is the third book in the Xenogenesis trilogy, and I'm reading this with Carl as a buddy read. Carl from Please Read Your Book, and he and I have done videos talking about the first book in the series, which is called Dawn, and then a video on my channel about the second book in the series, which is called Adulthood Rights. And so this is the final book in the trilogy. I hope to finish it in about a week or so, and then I will have another conversation with Carl about this book as well. So that is coming up. So those are the two books that I'm actively reading right now. I am listening to an audiobook right now, and that is Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution by Eli Mistel. And I'll say this isn't the book of his that I wanted to read. So Eli Mistel, he is an Harvard Law educated lawyer, but he quickly realized when he was working at a litigator's office that he didn't want to be a lawyer, so he never took the bar exam and became a journalist instead, and he writes for The Nation magazine. He's the justice correspondent, and this is his previous book. He just released a new book, and his new book is called Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. And I've heard him doing some of the podcast circuits talking about this new book, and I really wanted to read it, but it isn't available at my library yet, either in ebook form or in audiobook form. Yet his last book, which is all about the Constitution, is available. And I'm about 2/3 of the way done with this as well. Hopefully I'll be finishing it soon. And it's great. He is talking about the US Constitution, which he openly says is trash. Like, that's how he starts it. And he's actually focusing on the amendments. And his position is that the Constitution itself, the original Constitution, is more about the government and how the government is supposed to work, whereas the amendments are about the people that are being controlled by the government. The Constitution wasn't finalized until those first 10 amendments were also finalized in order to have the whole thing signed off on. So it is a critical founding document. And he basically, at the heart of his argument, is that this is a founding document that was created by racist slaveholders, and therefore he doesn't really trust any of the validity of the document and doesn't feel any need to bow down to anything this document says, because it is itself a product of a racist, misogynist culture, and the whole thing needs to be rethought. And so he's going through the amendments basically one by one and talking about how they affect us in the contemporary time, and what the legal ramifications of them been, how they could be useful, but they're often distorted, and all of these different things. So he's not saying everything needs to be thrown out. There are definitely parts of it that he says, this is useful, this I agree with, and he even begrudgingly mentions some Supreme Court cases where conservative judges have made decisions that he agrees with. So he is very, very opinionated, and it's very clear what side of the political divide he falls on, and he is not shy about that, but he is also honest when there are things that people he doesn't agree with make decent decisions. He will own up to that. He narrates this audiobook himself, and he's very theatrical in his presentation, and he's full of righteous indignation and snark and frustration at our government and at our country, because it has so much promise, and yet it feels tied down to these old ideas that were put forth by rapists and slaveholders. And so he is frustrated that the potential of our country is yet to be realized. So it isn't that he says our country is awful and that there's no hope. That's the frustrating part, is that there is hope. There is so much potential in this country, and it is unrealized due to a small group of small-minded people. And so his performance of his own book, I think, is really effective, and I'm really enjoying it. And so I'm hopefully going to be finishing that soon, and I look forward to reading his new book as well when that becomes available to me. So those are the 3 books that I'm in the middle of right now. And what am I looking forward to for the rest of the month? You know, if the first half of the month has shown me anything, I'm not going to have a lot of time to read a whole lot. So I do have a couple more arcs that I hope to read. One is called The Butcher's Daughter, The Hitherto Untold Story of Mrs. Lovett. And this is by David Demchuk and Corinne Lee Clark. And this is telling the story of Sweeney Todd, but from the perspective of Mrs. Lovett, Sweeney Todd's accomplice. This idea of retelling stories from a different perspective, I think, is a really powerful one. And obviously last year we had James by Percival Everett, and that was telling a story from the point of view of a secondary character in Huck Finn's story. And so this is a very similar idea, that is taking a secondary character who's integral to the plot but is not the focus of the narration, and saying, no, she has her own story to tell. She experienced this whole situation differently. So I'm excited to read that. I think it'll be fun. I'm also excited to read Overgrowth by Mira Grant. I really have enjoyed everything I've read by Mira Grant. I've read her Newsflesh trilogy, which is her zombie apocalypse books, and I've read her Parasitology trilogy, which is like techno bio horror, which I've also really enjoyed. And then I've read her mermaid story. I think it's called Rolling in the Deep or Drowning in the Deep. I don't remember quite now the title, but it's her take on a deadly mermaid story, and I've enjoyed everything I've read from her. Mira Grant is an alias. She has two other pen names. She has two other names that she writes under, her actual name and then another pen name. And I haven't read any of those books, but her horror slash sci-fi fantasy books that she writes under the name Mira Grant, I've enjoyed. So this one, Overgrowth, is a sci-fi horror book, and I'm looking forward to that. I do want to finish the Live Ship Trader trilogy, which means reading Ship of Destiny, the third book in the trilogy by Robin Hobb. I do not anticipate I'm going to actually read it this month. I hope to. It's a big book, and if the first 2 weeks of the month have shown me anything, I don't expect to find time to read it, but we'll see. There's, it's also old school April. I have a lot of vintage 70s and 80s horror books and sci-fi books that I've been picking up at the used bookstore that I visit whenever I go to Bangalore, and I want to read a bunch of those. And so hopefully I will, because those are much shorter. So I think I'll be able to pick up some of those and read those in my free time, but I don't know. So I have a handful of them. I'm going to see what mood strikes me when I have the free time, if I have the free time. Other than that, I don't have any other big plans for April for my reading. There is one more book that I'm hoping to read, and that is The Book That Held Her Heart by Mark Lawrence. This is the final book in the library trilogy, but I think it has been released already, like the digital copy I could get, but the paper copy, at least for me here, I've ordered it. I don't think I'm going to be getting a copy until the end of the month. So I don't think I'll be able to read that in April. Maybe that'll be a May read. But I've enjoyed the first two books of that trilogy quite a lot, and I'm looking forward to wrapping it all up. And I hear that it is a tearjerker of a book, and I'm not surprised because the first two books are very emotional. So I'm looking forward to that. But I don't think it'll be in April. We'll see. And I think that's it. As far as the audiobooks that I'm going to read, those are kind of, who knows? Like, I have a bunch of books that are on hold from my library. I have 2 different library cards, and I have books on hold at my libraries, and whichever books become available next are the ones that I read. So for those, I'm at the whim of other readers and see what books become available in what order. And depending on that, I will or won't read those. So I don't have any idea what those are going to be as they come forward. But that is what my April looks like. It's been busy. I have been really busy at the monastery, both at the monastery studying, with classes starting up again, and then teaching. I've done a lot of teaching this month. I have more teaching to do. And whenever I teach, it is 12 hours of travel over the span of 2 days. And I've already done it twice, and I have one more time to do it. So that's a good time to read. I get a lot of reading done while I'm traveling, but it's also exhausting. And so when I get home, after 12 hours of travel over 2 days, and after having spent so much time preparing for classes and teaching classes and everything that goes along with that, it just makes it hard to relax into a book. So it's been a busy month so far. The rest of the month is still looking busy, but luckily I'm really, really joyful that I have found audiobooks to supplement the rest of my reading life, because that has given me a lot of joy. And I think that's where I am right now. I'd love to hear what has given you joy this month, and what is your opinion of audiobooks versus print books. I know I was hesitant at first to get into them, didn't think that I would be able to appreciate them the way I appreciate audiobooks. The way I appreciate print books, but I'm really glad that I have taken the plunge. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, as well as your thoughts on any of the books I've read, or any recommendations for more books you think that might be interesting to me down in the comments. But for now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.